Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on the New Orleans Pelicans. So if you are unaware, the draft order was determined last night, and the Pelicans, who had a 6% chance of getting the number one overall pick, did in fact land the number one overall pick. The top four, as I remember here, is New Orleans got number one, the Grizzlies got number two. Number three is the Knicks, and number four is the Lakers, and then we'll even go number five is the Cavs, and number six is the Suns. So there you go. There's some of the top picks right there, or the teams that are going to be picking at the top, I should say. And this really changes a lot for New Orleans, I feel like, because before this, I felt like it was a pretty clear thing or a pretty clear concept or rumor that whoever gets the number one pick, the Pelicans will offer Anthony Davis for that and then get Zion. But now if they have the number one pick, it really becomes muddled because now they've got this star in Anthony Davis that doesn't want to be there, but now they've got the number one pick already. So the market for Anthony Davis for New Orleans is a bit different in that they can't just say, well, we'll trade him for the number one pick. Now it becomes, well, do we trade Anthony Davis for the number two pick? But is that really what Anthony Davis is worth? And then also, I don't think Memphis would really want that because, Anthony Davis definitely isn't going to stay in Memphis. He's going to leave there because they're just starting a rebuild right now. And so they're basically out. And so that leaves you with a few teams further down that are possible, like do the Lakers, is the fourth pick really good enough to get AD? Probably not on its own. Is the three pick from the Knicks good enough, which is basically going to be RJ Barrett? Is that good enough? I don't know. I don't really think so. So today I'm going to be basically going through some trade options for New Orleans regarding Anthony Davis because I still think that ultimately I don't see him wanting to stay there. I think, there are some reasons for him to stay, but I think if you think back to 2016 to 17 when they had DeMarcus Cousins in the second half of the season, they still didn't make the playoffs when the red carpet was right there for them to get in and they didn't. And then in 2017-18 last year, they really weren't that great of a team when they had both of those guys, DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, and they really only took off on that 10-game win streak after DeMarcus Cousins went down. I feel like the spacing and just the style would be somewhat similar between Zion and DeMarcus Cousins. I don't think that AD is really meant to gel with another guy in the post. I think that AD is meant to gel a lot like how uh, Giannis is doing with the Bucks right now. I think he's meant to be on a team with four really good shooters and him. So I don't think that it would work super well having both him and Zion because AD likes to play in the post. He can shoot a three-pointer, but that's more became a thing because DeMarcus was in the post. So Anthony Davis was trying to expand his game to create more spacing. But if you notice, like this year, he shot a lot. He played a lot more in the paint because he was much more of a center this year than he was with DeMarcus Cousins. And even if you look at the Pelicans when they had a lot of their success in 2015, the one of the two times they got to the playoffs with AD, their starting lineup was Drew Holiday, Eric Gordon, Tyreek Evans, Ryan Anderson, and AD. That was their main five guys, and you'll notice that basically the four other guys besides AD all are perimeter oriented players or play a decent amount from the perimeter. I know Tyreek Evans likes to penetrate and score at the rim too, but he can play from the perimeter. So that being said, that's really, I think, telling of what is effective for Anthony Davis and his style of play. And so I don't see Zion Williamson really being a huge draw for him, and that I think that the lane will still be really clogged. And what AD needs is basically a Klay Thompson to play with, but that's neither here nor there right now. But I think that Zion necessarily won't necessarily be the big draw for AD to want to stay. All right, so getting into, I do have some trade ideas that I whipped up here, and I'll get into them right now. So number one, I have the pretty obvious one that a lot of people expect or think maybe is most likely was be Anthony Davis to the New York Knicks. They're of course expected to sign Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in free agency, and a lot of people think that Anthony Davis will be sort of like the third key to that becoming a big three and being a really good team. So here is the proposed deal that I have. I think AD goes to the Knicks straight up, and in return, the Pelicans get the number three pick, or excuse me, the number three pick, which they would probably pick R.J. Barrett with, and then I would also send to the Pelicans Dennis Smith Jr., who's a very promising young point guard, and he reminds me a little bit of Russell Westbrook. Not as good as Russell Westbrook, but just reminds me of him a bit. And then also Kevin Knox, I would send as well, just to try and kind of round out who they're getting. So are the Pelicans probably getting fair value in this trade? I don't know. It depends on how well RJ Barrett translates to the NBA, but they are still getting a pretty decent return here in that they're getting the number three pick, who a lot of people expect RJ Barrett to be a phenomenal NBA player. They're getting Dennis Smith Jr., who's a very promising young point guard. And then they're getting Kevin Knox, who's a decent player, but I think the main draw for him is that he's a small forward who you can feel comfortable starting. I know as a guy who is familiar with the roster for New Orleans, I do not feel comfortable. If I were a fan or somebody on the team, I would not feel comfortable with Solomon Hill starting at small forward, which happened this year, or Darius Miller. Despite being a decent player, he's still not NBA starter worthy, but he was starting a lot of games this year. I don't find that either of those two guys are starter worthy, which I think Kevin Knox is. So after this trade for New Orleans, you're looking at a starting lineup that looks like Dennis Smith Jr., um, Drew Holiday, R.J. Barrett, Zion, and then, or actually, let's see here. You probably have Dennis Smith Jr., Drew Holiday, R.J. Barrett would actually probably be playing the three, and then you'd have Zion at the four, and then at the five, it would be pretty unclear. Maybe they re-sign Julius Randle, maybe not. He has an option, but it was only for 8 million, and he's likely going to opt out of that. So they might have to dole out some cash for Julius Randle to keep him to play center or go in a different direction. But Kevin Knox could come off the bench too, or they could do a thing where they start Drew Holiday at point guard, R.J. Barrett at shooting guard, and then Kevin Knox at small forward. But it could work a number of ways with how the rotation, or they could do Drew Holiday off the bench, even if they want him to be like the new Lou Williams, I guess. But either way, I think New Orleans is still getting a decent return for him, and I think you can't overrate the chemistry that if they did this trade, that Zion and R.J. Barrett would have right away, being college teammates. That could be very useful. Um, I think they would definitely have a strong foot in the right direction of a promising future. In that, if they did re-sign Julius Randle, you'd have him who's about 25. Zion's going to be 19. R.J. Barrett's going to be 19. Dennis Smith Jr. I think is going to be 21 or 22. And then you've got the guy who can kind of lead them, or Kevin Knox, excuse me, will also be around 21. And then you've got the wise all-star veteran who can sort of guide this team and give them some direction in Drew Holiday. He's been in a few pressure spots in the playoffs. He's gotten there a few times. Second round with Philly once, second round with New Orleans last year. He is a good player, made all defensive first team. I think he would be a great guide for this young team. He would instill defense in them. He likes to share the ball. He is willing to take a different role, like when he became a shooting guard to help the team work better. So he's a really good guy to have as an example. He's willing to instill ideals of changing up what you're comfortable with to serve the team, and he's also willing to instill defense and playoff experience. So that's great for them. So I do like this trade for New Orleans. For the Knicks, you get AD. It's pretty simple. You get a great player. I'm going to move on. Next trade I have here is the Lakers and the Pelicans. This one, again, is hard to convince probably New Orleans, but I'm going to do my best here. I think that Dell Demps was being a little obtuse when he refused to take the trades from the Lakers, but that may just have been because he's spiteful and vengeful. But regardless, the trade I have here is the number 4 overall pick, along with Lonzo, Brandon Ingram, and basically just those three in exchange for Anthony Davis. I was debating Kyle Kuzma as well. That's why I paused there, but I think that that's a bit too much. Or Josh Hart. But I think Lonzo, Ingram, and the number 4 overall pick would also get it done here. New Orleans gets a starting point guard, which they've wanted. They do have Alfred Payton, but I'm not sold on him. He's also only on a 1-year contract, so he'll likely be gone. Brandon Ingram's a very promising young player, and although the Lakers did disappoint this year, he did play very well down the stretch. He averaged around 17 points per game, I think. So your starting lineup after this for New Orleans would look like Lonzo at the point, Drew at the two guard, Brandon Ingram at the three, Zion at the four, and then if they re-sign Julius Randle, Julius Randle at the five. Again, Brandon Ingram really well fits that void at the three spot for the New Orleans Pelicans, which they really haven't had a solution to who to put there. Even when they had Tyreek Evans there like 3 years ago, he wasn't really a small forward. He's honestly more of a point guard. So they've never had a great person to slot in at small forward for a long time now. And then I'm not really going to go through the other teams' profiles as much as you saw with the Knicks. With the Lakers, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, AD and LeBron, two superstars. LeBron can sort of turn AD into a better version of Bosh, I think. Uh, and then you can get a third star possibly with some cap space if they want. Maybe like trade for Bradley Beal. Who knows if they do that? Trade like Josh Hart and Kyle Kuzma and maybe some other asset for Bradley Beal. That could happen. I don't know. We'd have to see. But again, they're getting Anthony Davis. It's a pretty clear what they're getting, I think. Now we have the less common trades that have been talked about and ones that I just myself found interesting. These ones aren't necessarily related to the draft anymore. They're just additional trades I came up with for New Orleans to give them some options here. Number one, I have New Orleans and Philly basically just swapping Ben Simmons and Anthony Davis. The contracts don't match up well, but Philly does have a lot of cap space this offseason, around like 60 million, I think. So they can swing it acquiring Anthony Davis at a loss. They're basically trading Ben Simmons and $19 million for Anthony Davis. So that being said, I think it's pretty obvious for Philly. Maybe at this point they'd try to re-sign Jimmy Butler, but then let Tobias Harris go, and then maybe re-sign Redick too. And then so your starting lineup would probably be looking something like they probably put in some sort of a replacement point guard, but for right now we'll just say T.J. McConnell. So starting, you'd probably have T.J. McConnell, JJ Redick, Jimmy Butler, Anthony Davis, and Joel Embiid. I think that's a pretty formidable team, and you can argue you have two top 10 players in the league on that team with an additional guy who's an all-star in his prime and Jimmy Butler. Of course, the two top 10 players I'm referencing would be Joel and Anthony Davis. And then you've got a sharpshooter in JJ Redick, and basically TJ McConnell would be the Mario Chalmers of this team, as in Mario on the Heat. That would be what TJ McConnell would be like on this team. The guy who starts, but nothing that much is expected of him. Maybe like 8 points and 5 assists a night, maybe. So yeah. And then for New Orleans, you get a guy who you can basically reset the table with in Ben Simmons. Now, there is some skill overlap with Zion and Ben, but at the same time, uh, there was skill overlap with Chris Paul and James Harden. And if Zion would have gone, or if the Lakers would have gotten the first pick, I can guarantee you they would have taken Zion and just matched him and LeBron and saw how it would go. And there have been guys that can't space the floor before and have done well together. DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, they got paired and they didn't really spread the floor, but they were still um, they adapted. I think that players do adapt when they come into these situations. I think Ben Simmons would. Um, I think the New Orleans starting lineup after this looks like Ben Simmons, Drew Holiday, probably Etuan Moore, but you could say that like on defense, Etuan would guard the shooting guard, Drew would guard the point guard, and then Simmons would guard the small forward just because he's so irregularly tall on New Orleans. Um, and then power forward Zion, center Julius. So that's again a really good starting lineup featuring an all-star in Ben Simmons, a former all-star in Drew Holiday, a good rotational piece in Etuan, and then a guy who's touted as another great player to come in Zion, and Julius Randle rounds it out nicely. That lineup would not have much spacing whatsoever. They'd basically have Etuan Moore and Drew Holiday exclusively on the 3-point lines, but and Julius Randle could develop his shot a bit more from out there, but it could work. The next deal I have here is I'm trying to make it contenders because I think that's more fun, interesting, and honestly realistic where this guy would get traded to contenders because they would want to be able to keep him afterwards. So the next trade I have here is between the Rockets and New Orleans. So for the Rockets, I just have them acquiring AD for of course, and as I said with the other teams, he's really good. He'll make a huge impact, bolster their team a lot, yada yada yada. For New Orleans, I have them acquiring 4 future first round picks. Yes, it's a lot, but they are acquiring people argue top 5 player in the game, and Anthony Davis. So I have them giving up 4 future first round picks, Eric Gordon and Clint Capella. So now what you have here is a situation in which the New Orleans is playing the long game here, kind of hoping for what the Nets got with the 4 first round picks from the Celtics. And I mean, although Houston would probably be good for the next 3 years with this team, they probably would fall off somewhat after that. And I think um, those first round picks can still be valuable, and you can find value anywhere in the draft. So it's still something. Eric Gordon slots in nicely at shooting guard. He can be what he was in New Orleans before when he was healthy. And Clint Capella is a good guy that you could either flip again for someone else if you keep Julius Randle, or you could keep him if Randle leaves, or you could keep him and then Randle resigns and you just have a bigger team. Um, so let's say, for the sake of argument, Julius Randle re-signs with the Pelicans in this scenario. Your starting lineup would look like uh, Drew Holiday at the point, Eric Gordon at the shooting guard. Actually, you might have Drew Holiday at the point, Etuan Moore at shooting guard, then probably um, Darius Miller at small forward, Zion at power forward, and then Clint Capella at center. Again, this team struggles a little bit from spacing in that Capella only ever shoots it in the lane essentially, and Zion really doesn't have much range either. But it's still a decent starting lineup, and the reason that I hesitated with some of my decisions is that I think that they would want Julius Randle and Eric Gordon to come off the bench and be basically what Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell were this last year for the Clippers, the best bench unit in the league. I think that would be competing for it with those two on there. Um, of course, you could just say, here's another way to say it. Their crunch time best lineup would be something like um, Drew Holiday, Eric Gordon, Zion, Julius, and Clint Capella. But again, not much spacing there, so they probably would take off either Clint Capella or Julius, depending on the situation, and put in each one more. And for Houston, you get a pretty good lineup afterwards of Chris Paul, James Harden, probably going to start at small forward. Probably somebody that they sign, honestly. But if you're just going off the current team, starting lineup's going to look like Chris Paul, James Harden, probably Gerald Green, PJ Tucker, and then Anthony Davis at the center. So pretty great starting lineup. And lastly, I have Anthony Davis going to the Toronto Raptors. So I have New Orleans getting Kyle Lowry and Pascal Siakam, and I have Toronto getting Anthony Davis. So what's New Orleans getting? An All-Star in Kyle Lowry. He's a 5-time All-Star, I think, at this point, if not 6. And then you're also getting Pascal Siakam, who is about 22 years old and just seems to be scratching the surface of what he could be in the NBA, averaging 18 points and 8 rebounds a night on good efficiency. So you're getting some promising stuff back, and a team where you can maintain being a contender right now while also developing Zion and sort of rebuilding on the fly. So New Orleans' starting lineup after this would look like Kyle Lowry, Drew Holiday, Pascal Siakam, Zion, and Julius Randle if they re-sign him. If they don't re-sign him, your starting lineup's probably going to feature Jason Smith at center, and then Zion, Pascal, and the rest of them. So I think that that's a pretty fair trade. They're getting an all-star who's still, I think he's 33, but he could help them contend right now. And you could get Pascal, who is at the opposite end of his career, very young still, and he just has all the promise in the world, in my opinion. As for Toronto, your starting lineup after this would probably look like Fred VanVleet at point guard. At shooting guard, you're going to have the same Danny Green, small forward Kawhi, power forward AD, obviously, and then at center, Marc Gasol, and your bench is going to have Serge Ibaka and Jeremy Lin as your main guys, and then OG Anunoby and Norman Powell. But still, this is going to be a powerhouse, and if Toronto pulled this off, I think that they would be the finals favorite next year, no matter what happens in the offseason. You basically just have no weaknesses in your lineup, except your point guard isn't a fanatical scorer. But that's really about it, because think about any of that trio, any combination, 2 out of the 3 of the trio of Gasol, Anthony Davis, and Serge Ibaka is going to be a nightmare on defense. So they will basically always have a tremendous defender on the court, and especially two tremendous defenders, and that those three will never really play together because they're all three post guys. So, but any given time, AD and Ibaka is great. AD and Gasol, and then already we've seen Ibaka and Gasol be an effective defensive tandem. So out of all these trades, I don't have one that I necessarily like the best, but I do think that the ones where a team would end up best off is probably the New Orleans one. Oh, excuse me, not the New Orleans one, the Toronto one. That would for sure be an amazing trade for them. Alright, you guys, I went a little longer today, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you have a good day. I hope you comment if you have anything to say regarding my trade ideas, good or bad. And again, I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.